London, 1970, Kensington. Market pulsed with the chaotic energy of counterculture revolution. Incense smoke mixed with patchouli oil hung in the air like prayers. Vintage fur coats dangled next to military surplus jackets. Students, artists, dropouts, and dreamers wandered through narrow aisles searching for something. Identity, belonging, escape, transformation. In a cramped corner stall barely 8 feet wide, surrounded by rows of platform boots and glitter heels, sat a young man who was about to change music history. He just didn't know it yet. His name was Farrokh Bulsara, though the hand-painted sign above his stall read Mercury's Vintage Footwear. He'd chosen that name carefully. Mercury, the messenger god with winged shoes, seemed appropriate for someone selling boots that could make ordinary people feel extraordinary. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon in March, as rain drummed against the market's glass roof and customers stayed away, Farrokh felt anything but godlike. He felt tired, broke, stuck in a life that seemed determined to keep him small. 23 years old, working 70 hours a week for barely enough money to pay rent on his shared flat in Shepherd's Bush. His art school diploma hung on the wall of his tiny bedroom, a reminder of dreams deferred, of a creative life he thought he'd be living by now. At night, he sang with a band called Smile. They had potential, real potential, but so did 1,000 other bands in London. Every pub, every basement, every community hall was packed with kids who thought they were going to be the next big thing. Most would never make it past playing covers in half-empty rooms. Maybe I should just accept this, Farrokh muttered to himself, rearranging a display of knee-high boots for the third time that hour. Maybe selling shoes is my destiny. Maybe I'm not meant for... The curtain of beads hanging at the entrance to his stall parted with a musical jingle, and David Bowie walked into Freddie Mercury's life. He wasn't famous yet, not properly famous. Space Oddity had given him a taste of success the previous year, but it had been a fleeting thing. One hit that the public seemed determined to treat as a novelty rather than a promise of genius to come. But even then, even as a struggling artist still finding his voice, David Bowie carried himself like he knew something the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. He wore a long military coat that had seen better days, velvet trousers that were slightly too short, and boots so worn down at the heels that they made a distinctive shuffling sound as he walked. His hair was longer than was fashionable, an indeterminate color somewhere between brown and red, and his eyes, Farrokh noticed his eyes immediately. They were different colors, one blue, one appearing brown or green depending on the light. Heterochromia, though Farrokh wouldn't learn that term until years later. All he knew in that moment was that this stranger looked like someone who'd seen things that ordinary people couldn't see. "Help you?" Farrokh asked, trying to sound professional rather than starstruck. Because even though he didn't know exactly who this was, he recognized something. A fellow traveler, someone else who didn't quite fit in the boxes society had prepared. The stranger smiled, a strange, knowing smile that would become iconic in photographs around the world. "I need boots," he said, his voice softer than Farrokh expected. Almost feminine, theatrical, something that makes a statement. Something that says, "I'm not like you, and I'm not apologizing for it." Farrokh felt something shift in his chest, because wasn't that what he wanted too? Wasn't that what he'd been searching for every time he looked in the mirror and saw Farrokh Bulsara instead of whoever he was supposed to become? "I think I have exactly what you need," Farrokh said, his own voice unconsciously shifting into something more confident, more theatrical. "But I have to warn you, these boots aren't for people who want to blend in." The stranger's smile widened. "Darling, I stopped wanting to blend in the moment I was born." Farrokh pulled out a pair of boots from the back of his stall, vintage 1940s military boots that he'd spent 3 days customizing with his own hands. He'd added platform heels that gave an extra 3 inches of height. He'd painted silver stars along the sides. He'd replaced the standard laces with black velvet ribbons. They were ridiculous, excessive, absolutely impractical for walking through London's rain-soaked streets. They were perfect. The stranger took them reverently, turning them over in his hands like they were holy relics rather than modified army surplus. "These," he breathed, "are exactly what I've been looking for." "How much?" Farrokh hesitated. He'd invested time and materials into these boots, expecting to sell them for at least £15, a week's worth of food, 2 weeks of bus fare, a month of saving toward whatever came next. But something in the stranger's face stopped him. A hunger that Farouk recognized because he felt it every day himself. The desperate need to become something bigger than what the world had decided you were allowed to be. Try them on first, Farouk said. Make sure they fit. These aren't the kind of boots you can return if they don't feel right. The stranger sat on the small stool in the corner of the stall, the same stool where dozens of customers had sat before, most of them looking for cheap shoes they could wear to jobs they hated. But when this stranger sat down and began unlacing his worn-out boots, the action felt like ritual, like preparation for transformation. Farouk knelt down. He was always careful about this part, always made sure his customers felt attended to rather than serviced, and helped guide the first boot onto the stranger's foot. It fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for him. The stranger stood up slowly, adjusting to the added height, finding his balance on the platform heels. Then he looked at himself in the small, slightly cracked mirror that Farouk had mounted on the stall wall. What happened next, Farouk would remember for the rest of his life. The stranger's entire posture changed. His shoulders went back. His chin lifted. He turned slightly to one side, then the other, watching how the boots transformed his silhouette from just another skinny London kid into something alien, something dangerous, something beautiful. These aren't just boots, the stranger said quietly. These are armor. These are magic. These are... He stopped, searching for the right word. These are who you really are, Farouk finished for him. Their eyes met in the mirror. Two young men, both strangers to themselves, both searching for the courage to become whoever they were supposed to be. How much? The stranger asked again, and now there was something desperate in his voice. A need that went beyond simple desire for a nice pair of shoes. 15 pounds, Farouk said, knowing what was about to happen, already knowing the answer before the question was fully asked. The stranger's face fell. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled collection of bills and coins. Farouk didn't need to count it to know it wasn't enough. Maybe 8 pounds, maybe 10 at most. I'm sorry, the stranger said, and the apology carried the weight of every dream deferred, every opportunity missed because of something as stupid and mundane as money. I thought I had more. I could come back next week? If you could hold them, no, Farouk said quickly, then making a decision that would ripple through the rest of his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. No, you need these now, today. These boots are yours. The stranger looked up sharply. I can't afford... You don't need to afford them, Farouk said. Consider them a gift, from one artist to another. You don't know if I'm an artist, the stranger said, but hope had crept into his voice like dawn breaking over a dark city. Yes, I do, Farouk replied. I can always tell. We recognize each other. We have to, otherwise we'd never survive. The promise between strangers. For a long moment, the stranger just stood there, staring at Farouk with those mismatched eyes that seemed to see through every pretense, every make, every wall people built to protect themselves. Why, he finally asked. Why would you give away something you made? Something that's clearly worth much more than 15 pounds? Farouk thought about lying, about making up some story about excess inventory or damaged goods, or having a particularly good week and being able to afford generosity. But there was something about this stranger that demanded truth. So he told it. Because I'm terrified, Farouk said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm terrified that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this stall, selling shoes to people who will never know my name, never hear my voice, never know that I had dreams bigger than measuring feet and polishing leather. He took a breath, surprised by his own honesty. And seeing you in those boots, seeing how they transform you, it reminds me that transformation is possible, that we don't have to stay who we were born as, that we can become something bigger, something braver, something that makes the world pay attention whether it wants to or not. The stranger listened to every word like it was a prayer or a promise. What's your name, he asked. Farouk Bulsara, he answered, then hesitated. But I'm thinking of changing it. Mercury, Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury, the stranger repeated, testing the name in his mouth like wine. That's a good name. A name for someone who's going to do extraordinary things. What's yours? Freddie asked. David Bowie, the stranger replied, though I'm thinking of adding something more. Something that sounds like it came from another planet. They shook hands then, a formal gesture that felt like sealing a pact, making a promise to the universe and to each other. When we're both famous, Bowie said, and there was no if in his voice, only absolute certainty. When we're both exactly who we're meant to be. I'm going to remember this moment. I'm going to remember the man who gave me the boots that taught me how to walk like I owned the world. And I'll remember the stranger who reminded me that I was capable of generosity even when I had nothing, Freddie replied. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can be. Bowie turned to leave, then paused at the beaded curtain. Freddie Mercury, he said, I don't know when we'll meet again, but I promise you, we will. And when we do, we'll both be wearing crowns instead of borrowed clothes. We'll both be kings of our own strange kingdoms. Then he disappeared into the Kensington Market crowd, wearing boots that a broke shoe seller had given him for free because sometimes magic is worth more than money. Montreux, Switzerland, July 1981. Queen and David Bowie were recording together at Mountain Studios, working on what would become Under Pressure, a collaboration that happened almost by accident, born from a chance encounter and mutual respect between two titans of rock music. The session had been going for hours. The pressure, no pun intended, of creating something worthy of both their legacies was intense. Everyone was exhausted, running on cigarettes and coffee, and the desperate hope that the magic they'd captured in earlier takes wouldn't disappear when they tried to build on it. During a break, Bowie stood up from the piano and stretched, wincing slightly. These shoes are killing me, he muttered, looking down at his fashionable but deeply uncomfortable Italian leather boots. Freddie Mercury, now fully Freddie Mercury, no longer Farouk Bulsara, no longer the broke shoe seller from Kensington Market, looked up from where he was reviewing lyrics. Something in Bowie's complaint triggered a memory that had been buried under 11 years of stadiums and recording sessions and becoming exactly who he dreamed of being. David, Freddie said slowly, a smile starting to form on his face. Do you remember where we first met? Bowie looked confused. I thought we first met at that party in... Before that, Freddie interrupted. Before either of us was anybody. Before Ziggy Stardust. Before Bohemian Rhapsody. Before any of this. Bowie's expression shifted. Memory was dawning, slow but inevitable. The market, he said. Kensington Market. There was a stall. Mercury's vintage footwear, Freddie finished. You came in looking for boots. I had a pair with silver stars and platform heels. And you gave them to me, Bowie said, the full memory flooding back now. I didn't have enough money and you gave them to me for free because... He stopped, trying to remember exactly what Farouk had said that day. Because we recognize each other, Freddie quoted his younger self. Because we have to, otherwise we'd never survive. The room had gone quiet. Roger Taylor and John Deacon were listening now, along with the engineers and assistants who'd been pretending not to eavesdrop on rock royalty. Those boots, Bowie said, and his voice had gone soft with something that might have been wonder or gratitude or both. I wore those boots to every audition for 6 months. I wore them when I recorded Changes. I wore them the first time I performed as Ziggy Stardust in front of an audience. They were like armor, Freddie said. Like armor that taught you how to walk like you owned the world. You remember, Bowie said. I remember everything, Freddie replied. I remember being terrified that I'd never be anything more than a broke kid selling shoes. I remember seeing you try them on and thinking, this person is going to be extraordinary. I remember feeling generous when I had no reason to be generous, except that sometimes you meet someone and you just know that they're supposed to be part of your story. Bowie walked across the studio and embraced Freddie. Not a showbiz hug, not a professional gesture, but something real and warm, and acknowledging 11 years of parallel journeys. You gave me those boots when you couldn't afford to give anything away, Bowie said into Freddie's ear. That might be the most rock and roll thing anyone's ever done. I was just trying to survive, Freddie said. We both were, Bowie replied. And look at us now. They pulled apart, both smiling, both recognizing in each other the same hunger, the same determination, the same absolute refusal to be ordinary that had driven them from obscurity to immortality. You know what the funny thing is? Freddie said. I ended up hating that shoe stall. Hated every minute I spent there, but I would do it all again. All the poverty, all the uncertainty, all the wondering if I'd ever escape, just to have that one moment, just to be the person who gave David Bowie the boots that helped him become David Bowie. And I would go back to being broke and unknown. I'd buy it done, Bowie said, just to remember what it feels like when a stranger shows you kindness for no reason, except that they recognize something in you that you're still learning to recognize in yourself. Brian May, who'd been listening from the other side of the studio, spoke up. So that's the secret? That's why you two work together so well? Because of a pair of boots from a Kensington Market stall? Not just boots, Freddie corrected, magic boots. Boots that taught us both the same lesson. Which was? Roger asked. Freddie and Bowie looked at each other and answered simultaneously. That generosity, when you have nothing, is the bravest form of magic that exists. The legacy of silver boots. The recording session continued after that, but something had shifted. The pressure they'd all been feeling to create something worthy, something memorable, something that would justify bringing these two legends together, transformed into something lighter, something joyful. Because they'd remembered why they were there in the first place. Not for fame or money or commercial success, but because once upon a time, they'd been broke kids who believed in magic, who believed that transformation was possible, who believed that the person you were born as didn't have to be the person you became. Under Pressure became one of the greatest collaborations in rock history, a song about the weight of expectation, about the struggle to maintain humanity under impossible circumstances, about the courage it takes to love and create and survive in a world that constantly pushes you down. And at its heart, though nobody knew it except the two men who'd shared a moment in a cramped market stall 11 years earlier, it was also about a pair of silver boots, about a gift given when there was nothing to give, about recognizing magic in a stranger and having the courage to honor that recognition. Years later, after Freddie was gone, Bowie would tell the story in interviews. He'd talk about the shoe stall in Kensington Market, about the generous armed stranger who gave him boots that taught him how to walk like a star before he was one. Freddie Mercury saved my life that day, Bowie would say. Not literally, of course, but he saved the part of me that was about to give up, the part that was tired of being broke and unknown and wondering if I'd ever become the person I could see in my mind but couldn't yet figure out how to be. Those boots were magic, real magic. The kind that happens when someone sees who you really are. Not who you're pretending to be, not who the world says you should be, but who you're meant to be. And they give you exactly what you need to take the next step toward becoming that person. That's what Freddie did for me. And I spent the rest of our friendship trying to give him that same gift back, trying to see him as clearly as he'd seen me, trying to recognize the magic before anyone else did. The boots themselves were lost to time, lost in the chaos of touring, or given away to some lucky fan, or simply worn to pieces and thrown away when they'd served their purpose. But their magic, the magic of recognition, of generosity, of believing in transformation even when you have no reason to believe, that magic lived on. In every performance where Freddie commanded the stage like he'd been born to it, in every incarnation of David Bowie's ever-shifting persona, in every artist who refused to accept the limitations the world tried to place on them. And sometimes late at night in recording studios or dressing rooms or wherever musicians gathered to tell stories about the old days, someone would ask, "What made you believe you could do this? What made you think you could become something extraordinary?" And if Bowie was in the room, he'd smile that strange, knowing smile and say, "A pair of silver boots," and the man brave enough to give them away when he had nothing else to give. That man was Freddie Mercury. And his generosity, his recognition of magic in a stranger, changed rock and roll forever.